I'm the Scale Model Geek, and in this video I'm going to build something really interesting. I came across this awesome looking tram back from the old Soviet days, and it's from MiniArt. It's in 1/35th scale, and I really want to do something post-apocalyptic with it. It just really looks like that's something that would be repurposed in a really interesting way. After building that crazy tugboat from my last video, and that kit came out in 1955, so this was an absolute shock to see the sheer detail and parts of this. This is a more recent kit, originally released in 2020 by MiniArt, and it is beautiful. The crisp lines in the panels is just wonderful. The technology available to model makers these days is just so amazing. And I must admit, when I opened up the box, the parts were a bit intimidating. There were so many of them, especially when I had so minimal amount of parts in the last couple builds. Anyway, a very brief look at the instructions, and then it was on to the build. And because I was going to repurpose this vehicle for other uses, I really kind of skipped around during the instructions. I didn't follow them step by step. A majority of the parts I won't even be using, like the chassis, the trucks, or the bogies, whatever you call them. So I'm going to have a lot of greeblies left over for other future builds. The reason I won't be using all those parts is because I'm going to replace the tram wheels with tank tracks. This vehicle will become a ship of the wasteland, looking for supplies and scavenging for food and water and fuel, whatever it can find out in the wasteland. There was a fair bit of masking to do to cover up all the windows from the spraying process. And the only flaw I had in the whole kit was this little missing piece out of the side panels. But luckily I only need to 3, and there's 4 there, so I won't need to use that part at all. Pretty straightforward, just gluing it onto the side there. And for the larger open areas, I'll be making some windows made out of corrugated iron. Some flaps that can open up to get access. Now these are the front section of the cabs at each end. And these handrails turned out to be an absolute nightmare for me. Once I glued them on, I just kept on snapping them off. Every time I handled the model, I broke at least one of these handrails off. I was forever re-gluing them. What a headache these turned out to be. As troublesome as they turned out to be, they actually do look really cool on the sides of the cab. And now for the tank tracks, I downloaded the wheels and the tracks from Thingiverse, available for free. And it was just a matter of assembling them all in Blender, which is the 3D software that I'm using here. It did take a bit of time, a bit laborious to get them all there, because each link of the track is a separate little object. So yeah, like I said, it took a little while, but well worth it. I now have them, and I can print as many as I need. And this was about 250mm long when I finally printed it. And for the actual chassis, I'm using some of these 1mm plastic card. I'm just creating a very long rectangle. This stuff's fantastic to use. You just need to score it 3-4 times and just snap it. And just adding some interesting angles to it, just to break up the box. I'm using these popsicle sticks to get the right height for the chassis so it lines up with those tank tracks. And just a matter of experimenting, putting down a few popsicle sticks and keep adding it till it's at the correct height. It's a bit wobbly, but it served the purpose. And I just used a spot of superglue on each suspension section there. And with the mount that was there, that gave it a really good solid bond. It's going to take a bit of weight, so it needed a bit of strength in there. and this little setup did the job. It's looking great. Now technically, you know, there's not really much of a suspension gap there, so if they're going to go over some rough rocks, it's going to be a really rough ride. They're a bit low, but hey, they look good. Now I'm just adding some greeblies to the side of it, and these are some railway trestles that I found in my greeblies box. I don't even know where I got them, they've been there for so long now. I'm just adding little bits and pieces just to make it look interesting. And that's a part of a aircraft, some engine part. And these are some nuts and bolts that I printed up quite a long time ago, and I've literally printed up hundreds of these, and they just sit in my little container, and every time I need nuts and bolts I just snap them off and glue them on with some super glue. Quick test fit to make sure everything's sitting nicely. It's starting to look like something now. This is the roof. As you can see, it comes in two halves. And the fit's really nice. I don't even have to do any sanding, maybe because it'll be hidden there. And I'm just adding some more greeblies to the bottom of the cab and working out the widths so I can make a platform and observation deck. Because we're going to have a couple guards on top, making sure they won't get raided by hostiles. And these are some trestles I downloaded from Thingiverse. Printed them up on my 3D printer. Then added some railing on the side. There's some eye bars, I think that's what they are. And also some solar panels from Thingiverse, because this thing's battery operated. In this world, fuel's really hard to find, and pretty much it's all gone off. So they kind of got to stick to electricity generated by solar panels and charged up in the batteries, which are located in the chassis. Now clipping these down as close as I possibly can, then I sanded them. And I also found these brackets on Thingiverse. I'll leave the links to the site in the description. Quick test fit to make sure everything balances out nicely. And I've got the location right for them. Now I'm using some of this 0.062 diameter plastic rod, and they're going to be the safety rails that are going around the observation deck. Now I did have some brass wire, but I couldn't find it anywhere, so I ended up having to use this plastic rail. But guess what? After I finished the build, I found the rods. They were in a drawer. So I mentioned earlier I need to make some square corrugated window panels. So I'm using these square strips to create the frame. So they have the four sides plus a support section in the middle. Pretty straightforward, just a square. With the frames all completed, I then needed to create some corrugated sheets. I did that by designing this in Blender, and this is a little press that I made and then printed up in my FDM printer. And the whole idea was to put some of this brass sheet, and I used a 0.003 what they call them, brass shims, and clamped it in between these two presses, and I ended up with this sheet, corrugated sheet. Came up really cool, really happy with that. Good little device, I'll be using it all the time, and it's scaled for 1/35 or 1/32, not really noticeable in something like that. Now I'm just putting a little plastic tube there to run some wiring, because I am going to put an LED light in the roof. So I need to run along the bottom and out the chassis. And I think it's about 150 mil, if I remember rightly, runs off a 3-volt battery, which is 2 AA's. And I'm using a 6mm acrylic tube to house the LED. Now with the tubing, I did need to cut down one side so I had a flat surface for it to stick to the ceiling of the tram. And a bit of super glue at each end just to hold it into place. And some more super glue to hold the whole thing onto the ceiling or the roof. I was constantly testing just to make sure the LED kept on working. I didn't break any links or connections. Now I didn't want the whole LED to be exposed in the clear acrylic tube, so I'm running a bit of masking tape here so I get a slit of light rather than the whole thing glowing. I did make one minor mistake here. I should have trimmed the masking tape a little bit shorter so it actually painted the terminal ends. Because when I ripped it off later on in the stage, you could see the soldering joints. Now I'm using this plastic putty because it has a very fine nozzle, and I'm just creating a beading around the acrylic tube. That's to hide any light leakages, and then the whole cab gets a base colour of this beige from Vallejo. Then using this barbarian flesh, I then give it a mottled kind of spray over the top of the light beige. Not only does this add a bit of visual interest, but also knocks back some of that yellow in the beige. And of course, when I do all the weathering, that'll knock it back just a touch as well. I'm using a combination of this German red brown and the red. I'm going to mix them together to paint the bottom half of the cab. I really like the colour schemes that they used to use in the 1940s, so I'm kind of roughly sticking to it, even though we're talking about the future. Or some multiverse where everything just went nuts. I'm using this dark sea grey for all the rest of the scavenging vehicles parts, like the tank tracks, the chassis, the roof, the platforms, and the base full of solar panels. Just a straightforward, nice even coat with this base colour. Then I'm going to use some of this light grey as a mottled finish to those areas, just like I did with the beige colour. Again, bit of visual interest just to break up the solid colour. By the way, if you haven't already, please smash that subscribe button, like the video, and please share it. Your support will be greatly appreciated. With all the airbrushing done, it was time to remove all the masking tape. And surprise, surprise, everything actually came out quite crisp. That's always a bonus when that happens. Now starting off with this dark brown wash from Vallejo, giving everything with a nice thick coat of this. Make sure I'm getting into every nook and cranny. Before I add the wash, I always give it a quick spray of some of this water, and that kind of spreads it out. It stops it from pooling up into little pools. For the interior of the tram, I'm using some of this dark rust wash from Vallejo. Though it looks like it's going on really heavy at the moment, when it actually dries, it looks really cool, and this is what it looks like. Now time to do a bit of dry brushing on the inside with some of this light sand. And this is simply to bring out some more detail, things like the rivets, bolts, those little brackets. And once that's done, I'm ready to pull off the windows on the inside of the cab. Just makes it a lot easier because it's not going to happen once I put the roof on. Now it's time to start detailing the tank tracks. I'm using some of this gunmetal to dry brush the tracks, the wheels, and the chassis. Dry brushing is such an easy and awesome technique, and it really pops out all the details, all the raised surfaces in the model. So far so good, no major disasters, nothing's broken or dropped it or anything, so I'm calling it a win so far. So I think it's time to glue the cab to the chassis. And I'm just using some 5-minute Araldite, which is a 2-part epoxy glue. And then starting the weathering on the outside, I'm using some of this deep brown accent colour from Tamiya and just hitting the areas around the windows. And this technique also brings out a truckload of detail. Off camera, I did paint these corrugated panels and now gluing them onto the sides. There are 3 of them two of them will be closed and one will be open. And there's one more much larger panel, and that'll be used like a drawbridge, an opening panel. Time to start the weathering on the outside. And like I said earlier, quick spray of water to make that wash flow a lot easier. And I'm effectively using the same wash colours that I had previously used. Starting off with the dark brown. And just letting it run down those panels. This really brings out the detail of the panels, the corrugation. Now I was going to use a combination of the rust texture and the streaking grime, but I ended up just sticking to the rust texture. Again, all I'm trying to do is add a bit more visual interest to the grittiness of this tram. Of course, the roof of the tram also copped the weathering technique. I spent a bit more time on the roof simply because it's exposed directly to the elements. You know, at the top of it, directly to the sun, that type of thing. And it's come up really nice. I like the subtlety of the weathering there. It's not too heavy. But the ceiling is what really, or the roof is really what cops it. Look at that, it looks great. Really happy with that. The rust come up really nice. These are the folding doors that go on the inside of the cab. Every door was a different part number, and I kind of lost track of which one was to go where, so I kind of ended up making it up in the end. Here is some of the cargo, which I printed up on my 3D printer. An oil barrel and a couple of water containers as well, or water barrels. And here I'm just pasting them just to figure out how many I'll need to paint. Because I did paint up, or rather print up, quite a number of these, and they just sit in storage, pardon the pun, until I actually need them. Now, I didn't end up using the oil barrels because I didn't like the way they turned out. Dark blue for the water barrels, or the first half of the water barrels. And for the second lot of barrels, some of this red from Vallejo. It's just a nice even coat. I'm going to use some of this medium olive for some jerry cans that I printed up. What I've done here is used a piece of balsa wood with some double-sided tape, and I've just stuck the jerry cans onto the tape and sprayed it. Made handling so much easier. And this insignia white paint will be used for the rest of the small little carry canisters, thingamajiggies, containers, water containers, that's what we'll call them. And look, I also found the lawn chair on Thingiverse, and that'll go on to the observation deck so the guard can have a bit of a sit down. Now, after a bit of research, I found some of these water containers actually have black tops, so I'm masking that up so I can protect the rest of it and keep it red. And for that, I'm using black. Surprise. And I must be having a really good lucky streak. Another lot of some really crisp lines after some masking. And here I'm just painting the caps of some of the containers black. Here I'm using the insignia white and the dark sea grey. I'm going to mix those two together and create a really thin wash to go over the barrels. I want some weathering on the barrels, but I don't want it to be heavily weathered. So they've kind of been knocked around and sat around in the warehouse for a little while without being exposed to the harsh elements of the outside. Once this wash dries, it becomes a very soft film across all the barrels, and it's really subtle. So you can see it's, you know, it's aged without being harsh. Bit of subglue for the solar panels. You can see I've painted them silver and the insides of it black. Off camera, I will add a bit of wiring that goes from the panel to the center of that base. To stick them into place, I just use the PVA glue, white glue, craft glue, wood glue, same stuff. While I was rummaging through my little Greeblies box, I found a chair and a table from a previous build from years and years ago, so I didn't have to make them. And that's all the cargo glued into place. You can see I didn't use the oil barrels, ended up adding a couple crates there. The handrails have been painted a flat black and then dry brushed with a gunmetal. And now it's the big reveal of the LED light, the filament light. Need to do a quick test once again, make sure I haven't broken anything, and it works. With the interior all done now, we can glue the roof to the actual tram. This turned out to be a bit of a headache. I was struggling to get that roof on right. Some of the areas just didn't fit. I'd like push the front down and the back would go up. Or the middle wasn't aligning with those struts. It did take a bit of force to lock it into place. But I eventually got there, as you can see. A bit paranoid the whole time I'd break something, but I kind of got through it. We can now glue the observation deck and the solar panels into place. I've got to say, I'm really happy with the way this vehicle is coming along. It's really taking shape. It's looking really good and really interesting. With the majority of it all glued together, yep, it's time to reveal all those clear panels. Now, I did have a bit of bleed from the paint, but the good news is I'm using some of this insignia white to weather the panels up. So they've been attacked by the elements. You can see on the very front one I've added a bit of a section where it's clean from the wiper. Now, I kind of thought the guards that will be posted on top of the observation deck would benefit from a couple of spotlights. So I found the top half of this spotlight on Thingiverse, and it's the bat signal, and the bottom half I created myself. Printed it up, gave it a base colour of black and a dry brush of gunmetal. Had to think about that one. Silver for the inside of the lens, and then I gave it a clear coat of gloss and subglued it into place. With the vehicle pretty much done, it was time to move on to the diorama base. And this is cobblestone that came with the kit. Problem is, it's a vac form, so it's really thin and flimsy. So I kind of thought, you know, what I might do is make a cast of it, so I can reuse the whole thing over and over again. But because it's a vac form, I needed to put a bit of support in the middle of it, so I'm just using this cardboard, hot stuck it into place. Because it's so thin, it does need a bit of strength in the middle there. I also cleaned up some of the imperfections, had a lot of dimples in the brickwork there. And I printed up some of these retaining walls on my FDM printer. And these are modular, so I have varying sizes, and I just clamp them together with some bull clips. As a safeguard, because the final casting, the plaster casting, is going to be quite big and thin, I kind of thought it needs a bit of support in the retaining walls of the rubber mould. So I left a bit of space there, so there's going to be some stiffness in the mould, and hopefully I won't get any warping when I cast. For the base of the mould, I'm just using a piece of cardboard and some of this masking tape to the edge of the cobblestone to stop it from leaking underneath. Creates a bit of a barrier. Extra work means I then have got access to a cobblestone road whenever I need it. All I have to do is just pour another cast. And then I can just cut them down, break them down to size. There are so many advantages to creating this cast. I think it's well worth the extra work. And then I just clamp that to the retaining walls with some wool clips. These bull clips worked really well. They held everything into place quite securely. Nothing moved, nothing fell apart. They were great. They were a really good idea. Now I did need to put some pieces of cardboard underneath the mould just to give it support. Now let's get into the pouring of this mould. I'm using some of this liquid silicone, and the ratio is 100 parts of the rubber to 3 parts of the catalyst. The way I worked out how much volume I needed was I poured a whole bunch of sand into the mould. I then poured that into the stainless steel container here marked how high it went, and then started adding the rubber to that height. The ratio I ended up using was about 1551 grams of the rubber and 45 grams of the catalyst. The rubber is so thick it did take a bit of force and a bit of, strength to mix it all together. The trick to make sure you've mixed it properly is you keep on mixing till all the streaks disappear. Now this took me a little while because it's quite thick and you're constantly folding it over and over again to mix it all together. Obviously if it was thinner it would have been a lot easier, but it's not. You can see how thick this stuff is. As a release agent for the mold, I'm using some of this CRC 808, and they actually recommend it on their website. It's a silicone lubricant and it's half the price of actual model release sprays. Oh, this stuff is just so gooey. Felt like I was playing with Play-Doh when I was a kid. Just the sheer weight of the silicone rubber pushed itself into all the little nooks and crannies. So it ended up going absolutely everywhere, and in the time I was pouring it, I could feel it was getting thicker. So it reacted pretty quickly, and you'll see just right now how it doesn't flow off the spoon as easily now. By the way, when you're using the mixing utensils, try and use stainless steel, because when this stuff dries, it just peels off the stainless steel, and there's literally nothing to clean. Now I just let it sit there. In fact, I left it for about 18 hours to harden. And harden it did. And this part, I was a bit concerned at how easy it'll come apart, and surprisingly, it just fell apart once I pulled the clamps off. The spray release worked extremely well in this case. You can see it just popped off. When it came to pulling the rubber mold off, I was a bit cautious because I wasn't sure how strong it was against tears. But it turned out it was extremely tough and heavy as well. And when I saw it for the first time, I was so impressed with the detail that was imprinted into the mold. It had come up so nicely. For my very first pouring, I used a bit of plaster of Paris which I bought from Bunnings here in Australia. 14 bucks for 3 kilos, and this I probably used maybe a couple 100 grams if that to create this first mold. And then I just added a bit of water to turn it into a thin paste. And I'm just using a piece of cardboard here to level it out, though I wouldn't recommend it. I'll probably go for a piece of board next time. And check out how good the final result was. Come up so well, the detail's fantastic. I did end up with a couple minor air bubbles, but those things I can easily hide. Now I printed up this really cool looking dude, and I think he comes from a game called Stalker. I do have a couple of different poses from the same character, and I also found 3 different figures that look like, they're from Chernobyl, and they'll be walking around in the wasteland. And here's the other Stalker dude. With the painting, I'm going to use a technique called zenithal lighting, and basically what that is you start off giving the figure a complete coat of black paint, and then using some of this acrylic ink, which is a white, you then spray it from one direction. So you get these highlights, and it looks like it's light hitting from one direction. Straight away you can see it creates the highlights and the shadow areas. It's a great technique and instantly highlights so much of the detail. And that's a better look of the base coat. Onto the colours of his garments, starting off with that medium green with a combination of the glazed medium and also the white. So I start off with a base coat of the green, and then adding a bit of white with the glaze, I then create the highlights. Some olive drab for the rest of his outfit, and same technique, a bit of combination of the medium as well as the white. Saddle brown for his shoes. and just some plain old flat black for his mask with some highlights. That's what he looks like finished. Come up well, I like it. Well, what can I say about these dudes? They're effectively just white with some khaki masks and some black goggle lenses, which I did with a Sharpie. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Oh yeah, I gave him grey gloves and a black belt. They still look pretty cool. I like this pose actually. Now I think it's time we head back to the diorama base with some detailing. Now this is a pile of rubble that I printed up in my 3D printer. I created this pile in a piece of software called Blender. And all the different components of this I downloaded from Thingiverse once again, like the barrels, the bricks, the speed bricks and some of the concrete slabs there. And I just put it all together. And then I gave everything a base coat of some flat black. The barrels with the dark blue that I used earlier for the water barrels. And for the concrete areas, I gave everything some different shades of grey. And I just randomly painted some bits and pieces. For the bricks, some of them red brown. But I think speed bricks are usually grey. And to tie everything together, is a combination of these two washes. And just absolutely smothered everything with the wash. Now, quick placement of the parts to work out my composition. And there's some stairs I also printed up on my 3D printer that I downloaded from Thingiverse. And this is just to give me a rough idea how I'm going to place everything onto the diorama base. And give me some ideas if I need to add any other bits and pieces. Off camera, I did stick the cobblestones to a piece of XPS foam. And then gave it a coat of flat black. Some 5-minute arrow dye to hold it into place. And I don't know what happened here, but it really dried really quickly. It's supposed to take like 5 minutes, but it stuck within 30 seconds. Just using some railway ballasts as rubble. And just some random stones scattered around the area. And also some kitty litter just to break up the sizes of the scatter. And to hold everything into place, I'm using this small drip bottle, and inside of that is a combination of water, PVA glue, and also a few drops of dishwashing liquid. Now you need to have the dishwashing liquid in there to break the tension of the water. Once you've added that, you can see it just flows through all the rubble, otherwise it'll just bubble up and sit on the surface without actually penetrating all that rubble. Now I left all that to dry in front of a heater for a couple of hours, and then hit it with some flat black to try and unify all the color tones. Now using a combination of a couple of different greys, I went in and just selected some bricks to paint up. I was trying to make it look like it was random and trying to avoid it coming up as a pattern. Then I used that grey and combined it with some red brown to give me that really bricky colour to it. And the same thing, some random bricks throughout the cobblestone. And again, that also came up really well. Now I'm just adding some PVA glue to the base because I'm going to use some static grass. Now I started off with some 2mm and then moved on to some 4mm grass. And the excess, I just used a vacuum cleaner covered with a piece of stocking to suck it all up. Hopefully my girlfriend isn't going to notice that she's missing one leg. Now that grass is way too green for me, so I'm using some of this US Earth Yellow to kind of tone it down a bit and make it look a bit drier than what it is. It also serves the purpose of combining the two different greens that I was using. But before I go any further, I do need to cut out a little section for the battery compartment, because remember we had an LED light. I almost forgot to put in this little section. Just a hot knife to cut it out. Make sure you are wearing a mask because there's so many fumes from this process. I'm using this barbarian flesh from Vallejo and creating a very thin wash to go through all the cobblestones. and this will also unify all the tones together. I'll put it into the rubble, the cobblestones, around the barrels, in the grass, absolutely everywhere. And that's the base pretty much done. So it's time to glue the vehicle and also the figures onto the base. And I'm using some 5-minute Aerodite once again to glue the track sections down on both sides, make sure there's a bit of strength in there. I've already fed the wiring lights through the small hole right in the middle of the base. And I'm adding a touch more vegetation. I've bought these little bushes of plants, dry plants, from AliExpress. Came all the way from China. They were cheap. They were like $4 each. Again, PVA glue. A flight of stairs so our dudes can get in and out of the vehicle. And we're almost finished doing this build. Let me know in the comments what you think of it. Did you like it? Any recommendations? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you very much for sticking around to the end, and I think it's time for our super duper hero video.